Hello everyone, it's History Behind the Warrior, and we are back once again with yet another Mortal Kombat 12 video, with us still coming off the highly anticipated countdown reveal by NetherRealm last week, showing off the ominous Chronica hourglass, and clock jumping 12 and striking 1. It seems that yet another reboot for the franchise is indeed on the horizon, with the possible direction of it swaying in the favour of the great Kung Lao ending for Aftermath's conclusion. But with that said, and the foundation having clearly been laid out, it kinda raises the question of whether or not the series needs yet another big reboot, as Mortal Kombat 9 felt like a definitive but very clear-cut way to re-establish the franchise to not only a new player base, but also a new generation of fans, as most fans of the original series would now be in their 30s and 40s, as both the games and the movies would get a reboot in the millennium. In many ways, this made a lot of sense, because Midway, NetherRealm before it was called NetherRealm, as a studio, effectively disintegrated into bankruptcy in the early 2000s, before then being bought by Warner Brothers, then being given a new title. And what's quite strange is that yet another reboot would eerily pass by when the parent company of NetherRealm, Warner Brothers, merged with Discovery. So that could very well explain not only why another reboot has been hinted at, but also why NetherRealm has had such a large gap between this release and Mortal Kombat 11, with it having been 4 years since their last game, breaking their tradition of a typical 2-year cycle, but with it only having been 3 installments since NetherRealm's reboot of the saga. It does raise the question of, is this actually necessary going forward, as it's only been 12 years since Mortal Kombat 9 with its last reboot? Well, today we're going to be talking about the issue that kinda has plagued the series, the pros and cons that do come with reboots, and the inherent nature of it to the Mortal Kombat universe, deciding on whether or not this is either good and healthy for the series, or bad and straight up terrible moving forward. With that said and accounted for, let's just jump right into it and talk about why, as a reboot, it kinda does worry me a little bit going forward. Now, as mentioned, it hasn't been very long since the last real reboot of the franchise, where things took a drastically different turn in a multitude of different ways, with the old guard having perished and the series having reintroduced an older villain in a new way to the franchise. Sounds familiar, right? Good, because it's actually the same plot layout for Mortal Kombat Deadly Alliance. You see, the point I'm trying to make is that whilst it was definitively more gratuitous in the MKX era, the idea of rebooting Mortal Kombat and creating a whole new generation isn't exactly anything new to the franchise, as the idea has existed for a very long time and just been approached in different ways and forms. Deadly Alliance could really be seen as the introduction of the next generation, and Deception really leaning into that with even more ideas. Mortal Kombat X takes a similar route with the introduction of the next generation of heroes, and the ending of Aftermath setting up to effectively be a requel, where a timeline will be drawn back to the great Kung Lao era, maybe hinting that we could meet the ancestors of fan-beloved characters. Now, this isn't a bad thing for a number of different reasons, as new eras generally lead to some positives. Whilst many of the characters introduced during the 3D games were kind of a miss, character developmental wise, the actual base of the 3D era is where a large amount of world building is formed, exploring and expanding the lore like never before, breathing life and purpose behind each realm and the universe it inhabits. It felt alive, like it was breathing with opportunity. For the Reboot trilogy, it took us to a new and very interesting age, where the original line of characters showed how much they had grown as people by becoming older and far more wise in their later years. And courtesy of these reboots, we would get some fantastic additions to the roster, like Havoc, Kenshi, Onaga, Takeda, Kotal, and many more. My point is, a reboot isn't inherently bad. It can do so much for so many characters in a multitude of really good and healthy ways. Like, let's say, if a character goes on for too long, doing the same thing over and over again, they could essentially be seen as rather one-dimensional. I feel like Reiko was a perfect example of this, and how a fundamental reboot could be extremely beneficial in altering that character into something so much more. On the more canon side of things, another incredible example is Johnny Cage, as the sheer contrast between his MK9 and MKX persona are night and day. Thus, we get to see how fatherhood truly transformed Johnny as a character. But unfortunately, reboots come with cons. And, well, one of the inherent flaws of Mortal Kombat, really as a whole, are consequences. Consequences used to be a really important part of the series, because during earlier games, when tragedy struck, resulting in a character's death, you felt the weight of that. The crack of Liu Kang's neck, the empty ripple reverberating through Shao Kahn's helmet, that felt real, like the stakes had never been higher. The series had taken a direction where it felt like no one was safe. But then, deception happens, and in an incredible act of strength, the returning Onaga was able to resurrect the dead heroes of Earthrealm as he laid siege across the realms. And as incredible as this is, I think this may have involuntarily actually become a bit of a catalyst for what we would see in the future, with history once again repeating itself in the reboot of Mortal Kombat 9, where Sindel goes on to kill the Earthrealm defenders, leaving them in tatters. These events are near immediately undermined a chapter later, as Quan Chi is able to resurrect them all, granting them revenant forms. Thus, the weight behind their demise feels kind of lost, but up to a certain extent, we do feel the repercussions of these events during X's story mode, and this would continue on into Mortal Kombat 11, where a Timequake would seek to rectify the issue. And you see, that's the thing, right? I know a lot of people blow the gasket at, oh my god, he's dead, but I think now the value of that has really been lost, not just due to the stakes having been taken away, but the main perpetrator being reboots now, as negating death feels like it's inherently tied to reboot the franchise every few games. I think the Onaga incident is what established this concept before completely running off the rails. The way they kind of worked around this for Mortal Kombat 9, I think genuinely does work, because it's effectively tied to a thread that's almost done, needing to spring off and become its own thing. That I get, that I like. The problem then becomes the immediate death and the revenants that follow. Thus, we are back to where we started, at the very beginning of the game. However, even with that in mind, there was always still secretly the hope that our former heroes could be cured of their corruption. It felt promised in a way, but instead of following through on these threads, we damn near immediately throw them out the window by blending two timelines together instead of resolving these issues. Thus, entire storylines and entire ideas are just never followed through on. That's why reboots and time travel now feel so problematic in the franchise. In this universe, this series, death no longer matters. It's a terrible kept secret. But even worse than that, complete annihilation is tied to reboots. And the problem that comes with this is constantly injecting engaging storylines and interesting characters to fall in love with are just then completely erased. And I get it, it's a franchise, it has to go on, but Mortal Kombat has a horrible habit of not following through on its ideas and ending its characters' stories. It's why we keep replaying the events of Mortal Kombat 1 to 3 over and over again, because it's the only trilogy that has a beginning, a middle, and an end. In the 3D era, we were introduced to the Deadly Alliance, setting up the Dragon King by learning of his army. In Deception, we meet him firsthand, and then learn of the greater being behind him, the One Being, who would then be cast aside for the Elemental Blaze. Similarities can be drawn here in the rebooted timeline, mirroring the events of the original 4 games, but completely diverting in its own direction for Mortal Kombat 11 and negating the Dark Raiden arc. Now, I don't want it to seem like I'm badgering on at this point, but there's clearly a lack of vision, a lack of consistency, and when it comes to these trilogies, I really hope it's something that can be rectified. So, should we do another reboot? Honestly, yeah. Not just because of the corner and premise we've worked ourselves into, because a damn multiverse exists now, but Mortal Kombat kinda needs to streamline its storytelling a bit. And that's coming from me, the lore guy for this series. There's too many bloated ideas, too many floating retcons, and too much convoluted canon that just no longer really matches up with each other. I honestly think a reboot is kinda needed to help re-establish the rules again, like giving characters real endings and making death matter. Rebuilding this universe up again is a monumentous task. Don't get me wrong, but it really does need it. And it's not like the previous foundation doesn't exist. It could essentially work as a creative resource to build up upon, to take older ideas and establish them in a new and creative way, which could be monumentously beneficial going forward. Trim the useless fat on the lore to not just have it make sense, but have it so people can understand the universe properly. Establish the realms with purpose. Give them personality. Actually give the Elder Gods some form of presence. Give the Titans and the One Being a real hierarchy. Give them all a purpose and reason to exist. I do feel like a fresh slate is kinda needed at this point. And with everything being completely new, this is the perfect time to do it. There's no restraints on who can make it onto the roster. There's no restrictions on who you can bring back from the dead, as it's pretty much only limited by the writer's imagination. I just hope that from this point onwards, the series takes a much needed change with understanding its legacy, whilst giving us something new with purpose. That is the key word here. Because, as the saying goes, those who do not learn from history are doomed to repeat it. So fingers crossed for what the future does hold, as I imagine there are just so many possibilities to play around with here. Now, with that said, what do you currently think about this reboot situation? Do you think we need another one? And do you think it's healthy for the series? Please do comments down below. But for now, everyone, that has been it for me. So stay strong, stay well, and keep on fighting as we all eagerly await the reveal of Mortal Kombat 12. Take care, everyone. I'll see you all soon.